Welcome again to my channel. This is Trev from Trevessence, and it is my absolute pleasure having you all here with me this morning as we continue the reading of the book Spare by Prince Harry. For those of you who have been following me, I hope you have been enjoying listening to me read this book as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. And for those of you who are new here, a very special welcome to you. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you all have not yet hit that subscribe button, now is a great time to do so. And to all my returning travelers, I want to say thank you for your continued support. Now, we are still on part two of the book, and today we are going to read from chapter 24 in part two of the book Spare, written by Prince Harry. Come with me, guys. Let's begin. Chapter 24. Flack, they called her. She was funny and sweet and cool. I met her at a restaurant with some mates, months after Chelsea and I had gone our separate ways. Spike, this is Flack. Hi, what do you do, Flack? She was on TV, she explained. She was a presenter. Sorry, I said. I don't watch much TV. She wasn't taken aback that I didn't recognize her, which I liked. She didn't have a big ego. Even after she explained who she was and what she did, I still wasn't certain. What's your full name again? Caroline Flack. Days later, we met for dinner and games. Poker night at Marcus Flat, Braham Gardens. After an hour or so, I stepped outside, disguised in one of Marcus' cowboy hats, to speak with Billy the Rock. As I exited the building, I lit a cigarette and looked right. There, behind a parked car, two sets of feet and two bobbing heads. Whoever it was didn't recognize me in Marco's hat, so I was able to stroll casually down to Bill and lean into his police car and whispered, "Boogie at 3 o'clock." What? No. Billy, how could they have known? Search me. No one knows I'm here, and they're tracking me, and they're getting into my phone. Or Flax. Billy bolted from the car, ran around the corner, surprised the two paps. He screamed at them, but they screamed right back, entitled, emboldened. They didn't get their photo that night. Small victory. But very soon after, they papped me and Flack, and those photos set off a frenzy. Within hours, a mob was camped outside Flack's parents' house, and all her friends' houses, and her grandmother's house. She was described in one paper as my bit of rough because she had once worked in a factory or something. Jesus Christ, I thought, are we really such a country of insufferable snobs? I continued to see Flack on and off, but we didn't feel free. We kept on, I think, because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company and because we didn't want to admit defeat at the hands of those arseholes. But the relationship was tainted, irredeemably, and in time we agreed that it just wasn't worth the grief and harassment, especially for her family. Goodbye, we said. Goodbye and good luck. Chapter 25. I went with JLP to Kensington Palace for a cocktail with General Dunham. As we knocked at the door to the General's apartment, I felt jumpier than I had when leaving for war. The General and his wife, Pippa, greeted us warmly, congratulated me on my service. I smiled, but then frowned. Yes, they did. They were sorry about my deployment being cut short. The press, they ruined everything, didn't they? They do. They surely do. The General poured me a gin and tonic. We gathered in chairs, a sitting area, and I took a big gulp and felt the gin go down and blurted that I needed to get back. I needed to do a full and proper tour. The general started. Oh, I see. Well, if that's the case, we didn't think aloud. Running, we began thinking aloud, running through different options, analyzing all the politics and ramifications of each. What about, say, becoming a helicopter pilot? Wow, I leaned back. Hadn't ever thought about that. Maybe because Willie and my father and grandpa and Uncle Andrew were pilots. I was always keen on following my own line, doing my own thing. But General Donat said this would be the best way, the only way. I'd be safer, so to speak, above the fray, among the clouds. So would everyone else serving with me. Even if the press were to find out I'm gone back to Afghanistan, even if they did something stupid again, even when they did something stupid, so what? The Taliban might know where I was, but good luck to them tracking me in the air. How long until I can qualify as a pilot, General? About 2 years. I shook my head. Too long, sir. He shrugged. It takes what it takes, and for good reason. There was a great deal of schoolwork involved, he explained. Bloody hell! Or at every turn, life was determined to drag me back into the classroom. I thanked him, told him I'd think about it. Chapter 26. But I spent that summer of 2008 not thinking about it. I didn't think much about anything besides the 3 wounded soldiers who had been with me on the plane home. I wanted other people to think about them too and talk about them. Not enough people were thinking and talking about British soldiers coming back from the battlefield. With every free minute, I was trying to work out a way I could change that. In the meantime, the palace was keeping me busy. I was sent to America, my first official working trip there. I'd been to Colorado once, whitewater rafting, and touring Disney World with Mummy. JLP was involved in drafting the itinerary, and he knew exactly the kinds of things I wanted to do. I wanted to visit wounded soldiers, and I wanted to lay a wreath at the site of the World Trade Center. And I wanted to meet the families of those who had died on September 11th of 2001. He made it all happen. I remember little else of that trip besides these moments. I look back and read stories of the hullabaloo, everyone I met, everywhere I went, the giddy discussions of my mother, much of it due to her love of America and her historic visits there. But what I remember most is sitting with wounded soldiers, visiting military grave sites, talking to families swamped in grief. I held their hands. I nodded and told them, I know. I think we all made each other feel better. Grief is a thing best shared. I returned to Britain firmer in my belief that more needed to be done for everyone affected by the war on terror. I pushed myself hard, too hard. I was burnt out and didn't know it, and many mornings I woke feeling weak with fatigue. But I didn't see how I could slow down because so many were asking for help, so many were suffering. Around this time, I learned about a new British organization, Help for Heroes. I loved what they were doing, the awareness they were bringing to the plight of soldiers. Willie and I reached out to them. What can we do? There is something, said the founders, parents of a British soldier. Would you wear our wristband? Of course, we wore one at a baseball game, at a baseball football game with Kate. And the off guys, forgive me. Sometimes my brain do go ahead of my tongue, or vice versa. Let's start that paragraph again. There is something, said the founders, parents of a British soldier. Would you wear our wristband? Of course. We wore one at a football game with Kate, and the effect was electrifying. Demand for the wristband skyrocketed. Donations began rolling in. It was the start of a long, meaningful relationship. More, it was a visceral reminder of the power of our platform. Still, I did most of my work behind the scenes. I spent many days at Selly Oak Hospital and Heatley Court, chatting with soldiers, listening to their stories, trying to give them a moment of peace or laugh. I never alerted the press and only let the palace do so once, I think. I didn't want a reporter within a mile of the I didn't want a reporter within a mile of those encounters, which might look casual on the surface, but were in reality searingly intimate. You were in Helmand province too? Oh yes. Lost many guys out there? Yeah. Anything I can do, you are doing it, mate. I stood by the bedsides of men and women in a terrible state, and often with their families. One young lad was wrapped in bandages, head to foot, in an induced coma. His mom and dad were there, and they told me they'd been keeping a diary about his recovery. They asked me to read it. I did. Then, with their permission, I wrote something in it for him to read when he awoke. Afterwards, we all hugged, and when we said goodbye, it felt like family. Finally, I went to a physical rehab center for an official engagement and met with one of the soldiers from the flight home, Ben. He told me how the IED had taken off his left arm and right leg. Boiling hot day, he said. He was running, heard a blast, then felt himself flying 20 feet into the air. He remembered seeing his leg leaving his body. He told me this was a faint brave. He told me, he told me this with a faint, brave smile. The day before my visit, he had received his new prosthetic leg. I glanced down. Very sleek, mate. Looks quite strong. We'll see, we'll soon see, he said. His rehab regimen called for him to go up and down a climbing well all day. Guys, I thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for staying with me as I read this book, Spare, by Prince Harry. Forgive me for sometimes itching. That does happen in the natural world of reading. And sometimes as I read and I think about what I'm reading, that happens. And it's okay because it had some character to the reading. And I appreciate you for sticking by me as we do this in its natural form. I hung around, watched. He settled into a harness, grabbed a rope, shimmied up the wall. He gave a rousing whoop and cheer at the top, then a wave, then climbed back down. I was astounded. I'd never been so proud to be British, to be a soldier, to be his brother in arms. I told him so. I told him I wanted to buy him a beer for getting to the top of that wall. No, a crate of beer. We laughed. Wouldn't say no to that, mate. He said something about wanting to run a marathon. I said if he ever did, when he did, he'd find me waiting at the finish line. Chapter 27. Towards the end of that summer, I went to Botswana, met up with Tej and Mike. They had recently done masterwork on the David Attenborough series Planet Earth and a few other BBC films. And now they were shooting an important film about elephants. Several herds, stressed by habitat encroachment and drought, were stampeding into Namibia in search of food, running straight into the arms of poachers, hundreds armed with AK-47s. Tej and Mike hoped their film might shine a light on this rolling massacre. I asked if I could help. They didn't hesitate. Course, Spike. In fact, they offered to hire me as a credited, though unpaid cameraman. From day one, they talked about how different I seemed. Now that I wasn't always a hard worker, Not that I wasn't always a hard worker, but clearly I've learned from the army how to take direction. They never had to tell me anything twice. Many times during that shoot, we'd be riding around the bush in their flatbed truck, and I'd gaze off and think, how bizarre. My whole life, I've despised photographers because they specialize in stealing your freedom. And now I'm a working photographer, fighting to preserve the freedom of these majestic animals and feeling freer in the process. More ironic, I was filming veterinarians as they put tracking devices on the animals. The devices would help researchers better understand the herd's migration patterns. Until now, I didn't have the happiest associations with tracking devices. One day we filmed the vet dart a big bull elephant, then wrap a tracking collar around his neck. But the dart only nicked the elephant's tough skin, so he was able to gather himself and charge away. Mike yelled, grab the camera, Spike, run! The elephant was tearing through thick bush, not mostly along a sandy path, though sometimes there was no path. The vet and I tried to stay in his footsteps. I couldn't believe the animal's speed. He went 8 kilometers before slowing, then stomping. I kept my distance, and when the vet caught up, I watched him put another dart into the elephant. Finally, the big fellow went down. Moments later, Mike kept roaring up in his truck. Good job, Spike. I was panting, hands on my knees, bathed in sweat. Mike looked down in horror. Spike, where are your shoes? Oh, I left them on the truck. Didn't think there was time to grab them. You ran 8 kilometers through the bush in no shoes? I laughed. You told me to run. Like you said, the army taught me how. Like you said, the army taught me how to take directions. Someone says run, run. Don't have time to pick up your shoes, just run. Chapter 28, guys. Right at the turn or the new right at the turn of the new year 2009, a video went viral. Me as a cadet 3 years earlier, sitting with other cadets at an airport, Cyprus perhaps, or else maybe waiting to fly to Cyprus. The video was shot by me, killing time before our flight, messing around. I panned the group, gave a running commentary on each lad. And when I came to my fellow cadet and good friend Ahmed Raza Khan, a Pakistani, I said, ha, our little Paki friend. I didn't know that Paki was a slur. Growing up, I'd heard many people use that word and never saw anyone flinch or cringe, never suspected them of being racist. Neither did I know anything about unconscious bias. I was 21, awash in isolation and privilege, and if I thought anything about this word at all, I thought it was like Aussie, harmless. I'd sent the footage to a fellow cadet who was making an end of year video. Since then, it had circulated, flitted from computer to computer, and ultimately ended up in the hands of someone who sold it to the news of the world. Heated condemnations began rolling in. I'd learned nothing, people said. I'd not matured one bit after the Nazi debacle, people said. Prince Harry is worse than a thicko, they said, worse than a party boy. He's a racist. The Tory leader denounced me. A cabinet minister went on TV to flog me. Ahmed's uncle condemned me to the BBC. I was sitting in Highgrove, watching this furor rain down, barely able to process it. My father's office issued an apology on my behalf. I wanted to issue one as well, but courtiers advised against it. Not the best strategy, sir. The hell with strategy. I didn't care about strategy. I cared about people not thinking I was a racist. I cared about not being a racist. Above all, I cared about Ahmed. I connected with him directly, apologized. He said he knew I wasn't a racist. No big deal. But it was. And his forgiveness, his easy grace, only made me feel worse. Chapter 29. As that controversy continued to spread, I shipped off to RAF Barkston Heath. Strange time to begin flight training, to begin any kind of training. My congenit my congenitally weak powers of concentration were never weaker. But maybe, I told myself, it's also the best time. I wanted to hide from humanity, flee the planet, and since a rocket wasn't available, maybe an airplane would do. Before I could climb into an aircraft, however, the Army would need to make sure I had the right stuff. For several weeks, they poked my body, probed my mind. Drug-free, they concluded. They seemed surprised. Also, videos to the contrary, notwithstanding, not a total thicko. So, proceed. My first aircraft would be a Firefly, they said. Bright yellow, fixed wing, single prop. Simple machine, according to my first flight instructor, Sergeant Major Booley. I got in and thought, really, didn't think simple to me. I turned to Booley, studied him. He wasn't simple either. Short, solid, tough. He had fought in Iraq and the Balkans and should have been a hard case, given all he had seen and been through. But in fact, he seemed to suffer no ill effects from his tours of combat. On the contrary, he was all gentleness. He needed to be. With so much on my mind, I entered our sessions widely distracted, and it showed. I kept expecting Booley to lose patience, to begin shouting at me, but he never did. In fact, after one session, he invited me for a motorbike ride in the country. Let's go and clear our heads, Lieutenant Wales. It worked like a charm, and the motorbike, a gorgeous Triumph 675, was a timely reminder of what I was after in these flight lessons: speed and power and freedom. Then we discovered we weren't free. The press had followed us the whole day and packed us outside Booley's house. After a period of acclimatizing After a period of acclimatizing to the Firefly's cockpit, becoming familiar with the control panel, we finally took her up. On one of our first flights together, with no warning, Booley threw the aircraft into a stall. I felt the left wing dip, a sickening feeling of disorder, of entropy, and then, after several seconds, that felt like decades. We discovered the aircraft and leveled the wings. We recovered the aircraft and leveled the wings. I stared at him. What in the absolute world? Was this an aborted suicide attempt? No, he said gently. This was the next stage in my training. Countless things can go wrong in the air, he explained, and he needed to show me what to do, but also how to do it. Stay cool. Our next flight, he pulled the same stunt, but this time he didn't recover the aircraft. As we went spinning and pirouetting towards girls, guys, I'm always feeling my head doing the same thing as what I'm reading about the aircraft doing. Oh my. Our next flight, he pulled the same stunt, but this time he didn't recover the aircraft. As we went spinning and pirouetting towards Earth, he said, "It's time." For what? For you to do it. He looked at the controls. I grabbed them, stuck the boot in, regained the aircraft in what felt like the nick of time. I looked at Booley, waited for congratulations. Nothing. Barely any reaction at all. Over time, Booley would do this again and again. cut the power, put us into free fall, as the creaking metal and roaring white noise of the stilled engine became deafening. He turned calmly to his left. It's time. It's time. Time. You have control. I have control. After I re- after I restore the power, after we restore the base safely, there was never any fanfare, not even much chatter, no medals in Booley's cockpits for simply doing your job. You got no medals for simply doing your job. At last, one clear morning, after a routine handful of circuits over the airfield, we landed softly, and Bully jumped out as if the firefly were on fire. What's the matter? It's time, Lieutenant Wales. It's time. Time for you to solo. Oh, okay, okay. Up I went, after first making sure my parachute was strapped on. I did one or two circuits around the airfield, talking to myself all the way. Full power. Keep the wheel on the white line. Pull up slowly. Dip the nose. Don't stall. Turn in the climb. Level off. Okay, now you are downwind. Radio the tower. Check your ground markers. Pre-landing checks. Reduce power. Stand to descend in the turn. There you go. Steady now. Roll out there. Line up. Line up. Line it up. 3-degree flight path. Get the nose on the piano keys. Request clearance to land. Point the aircraft where you want it to land. I made an uneventful one bounce landing and taxied off the runway. To the average person, it would have looked like the most mundane flight in the history of aviation. To me, it was one of the most wonderful moments of my life. Was I a pilot now? Hardly, but I was on my way. I jumped out, marched up to Booley. My God, I wanted to high five him, take him out for drinks, but it was out of the question. You don't get a medal for doing your job. The one thing I absolutely didn't want to do was say goodbye to him, but that was what needed to happen next. Now that I soloed, I needed to embark on the next phase of my training. As Bully was so fond of saying, it was time. Chapter 30. I shipped off to RAF Shawbury and discovered that helicopters were much more complex than fireflies. Even the pre-flight checks were more extensive. I stared at the galaxy of toggles and switches and thought, how am I going to memorize all this? Somehow I did, slowly, under the watchful eyes of my two new instructors, Sergeant Majors Lazelle and Mitchell. I learned them all. In no time, we were lifting off, rotors beating the frothy clouds, one of the great physical sensations anyone can experience, the purest form of flying in many ways. The first time we ascended straight vertical, I thought I was born for this. But flying the helicopter, I learned, wasn't the hard part. Hovering was. At least 6 long lessons were devoted to this one task, which sounded easy at first, but quickly came to seem impossible. In fact, the more you practiced hovering, the more impossible it seemed. The main reason was a phenomenon called hover monkey. Just above the ground, a helicopter falls prey to a fiendish confluence of factors: airflow, downward draft, gravity. First it wobbles, then it rocks, then it pitches and yaws, as if invisible monkeys are hanging from both its skids, yanking. To land the helicopter, you have to shake off those hover monkeys, and the only way to do that is by ignoring them. Easier said. Time and time again, the other monkeys got the better of me, and it was small consolation that they also got the better of every other pilot training with me. We talked among ourselves about these little bastards, these invisible gremlins. We grew to hate them, to dread the shame and rage that came with being bested by them yet again. None of us could work out how to restore the aircraft's equilibrium and put it on the deck without denting the fuselage or scrapping the skids. To walk away from a landing with a long, crooked mark on the tarmac behind you, that was the ultimate humiliation. Come the day of our first solas, we were all basket cases. The hover monkeys, the hover monkeys. That was all you heard around the kettle and the coffee pot. When it was my turn to climb into the helicopter, said a prior, asked the tower for clearance. All clear. I started her up, lifted off, did several laps around the field, no problem, despite strong winds. Now it was 0 hour. On the apron, on the apron were 8 circles. You had to land inside one. Left of the apron was an array was an orange brick was an orange brick building with huge glass windows where the other pilots and students waited their turn. I knew they were all standing at the window, watching, as I felt the other monkeys take hold. The aircraft was rocking. Get off, I shouted. Leave me alone. I fought the controls and managed to set the helicopter inside one of the circles. Walking inside the orange building, I threw up my chest and proudly took my place at the windows to watch the others. Sweaty, but smiling. Several student pilots had to abort their landings that day. One had to set down on the nearby patch of grass. One landed so hot and wobbly, fire trucks and an ambulance rushed to the scene. When he walked inside the orange building, I could see in his eyes that he felt as I would have felt in his shoes. Part of him honestly wished he had crashed and burnt. Chapter 31. During this time, I was living in Shropshire with Willie, who was also training to become a pilot. He had found a cottage 10 minutes from the base on someone's estate and invited me to stay with him, or maybe I invited myself. The cottage was cozy, charming, just up a narrow country lane and behind some thickly canopied trees. The fridge was stuffed with vacuum-packed meals sent by Pa's chef. Creamy chicken and rice, beef curry. He gone back to that beef curry, talk about beef curry, goat curry. At the back of the house, there were beautiful stables, which explained the horse smell in every room. Each of us enjoyed the arrangement, our first time living together since Eton. It was fun. Better yet, we were together for the decisive moment, the triumphant unraveling of Murdoch's media empire. After months of investigation, a gang of reporters and editors at Murdoch's trashiest newspaper were finally being identified, handcuffed, arrested, charged with harassment of politicians, celebrities, and the royal family. Corruption was being exposed, finally, and punishments were forthcoming. Among the soon-to-be exposed villains was the thumb that some journalists who had long ago published an absurd non-story about my thumb injury at Eton. I'd healed up nicely, but the thumb had never mended his ways. On the contrary, he had got a whole lot worse. He had moved up the ranks of the newspaper world, becoming a boss with a whole team of thumbs at his command. Under his thumb, you might call it, many of them hacking willy-nilly into people's phones, blatant criminality, which the thumb claimed laughably to know nothing about. Also going down, rehabber cooks. The same loathsome editor who had cooked up my rehab charade, she had been resigned. 2 days later, the cops arrested her. Oh, the relief we felt when we heard, for us and our country. A similar fate was soon to befall the others, all the plotters and stalkers and liars. Soon enough, they would all lose their jobs and their ill-gotten fortunes, amassed during one of the wildest crime sprees in British history. Justice! I was overjoyed, and so was Willie. More, it was glorious to finally have our suspicions validated and our circle of closest friends vindicated, to know that we hadn't been stark, to know that we hadn't been stark, starring paranoid. Things about Things really had been amiss. We had been betrayed, as we had always suspected, not by any bodyguard or best mates. It was those Fleet Street weasels yet again, and the Metropolitan Police who had inexplicably failed to do their jobs, refusing time and time again to investigate and arrest obvious lawbreakers. The question was why? Payoffs? Collusions? Fair? We'd soon find out. The public was horrified. If journalists could use their mighty powers vested in them for evil, then democracy was in a sorry shape. More, if journalists were allowed to probe and foil the security measures that notable figures and government officials required to stay safe, then they'd ultimately show terrorists how to do it too. And then it would be a free for all. No one would be safe. For generations, Britons had said with a wry laugh, "Oh, well, our course of course, our newspapers are shit, but what can we do?" Now they weren't laughing, and there was general agreement. We needed to do something. There were even death threats coming from the. Let's do that again. There were even death rattles coming from the most popular newspaper, Murdoch's News of the World. The leading culprit in the hacking scandal, its very survival was in doubt. Advertisers were talking about fleeing. Readers were talking about boycotts. Was it possible? Murdoch's baby, his grotesque two-headed circus baby, might finally expire. A new era was at hand? Was it? Strange. While all this put Willie and me in a chipper mood, we didn't talk much about it explicitly. We had loads of laughs in that cottage, passed many happy hours talking about all kinds of things, but seldom that. I wondered if it was just too painful, or maybe still too unresolved. Maybe we didn't want to jinx it, didn't dare pop the cork on that champagne until we saw photos of rehabber cooks and the thumb sharing a cell. Or maybe there was some tension under the surface between us, which I wasn't fully comprehending. While sharing that cottage, we agreed to a rare joint interview in an airplane hangar at Shawbury, during which Willie griped endlessly about my habits. "Harry's a slob," he said. "Harry snores." I turned and gave him a look. Was he joking? I cleaned up after myself, and I didn't snore. Besides, our rooms were separated by thick walls, so even if I did snore, there was no way he heard. The reporters were having fits of giggles about it all, but I cut in, "Lies, lies. That only made them laugh harder." Willie too. I laughed as well, because we often bantered like that. But when I look back on it now, I can't help but wonder if there wasn't something else at play. I was training to get to the front line. I was training to get to the front lines, the same place Willie had been training to get. But the palace had scuttled his plans. The spare, sure, let him run around a battlefield like a chicken with its head cut off, if that's what he likes. But this here, no. So Willie was now training to be a search and rescue pilot, and perhaps feeling quietly frustrated about it. In which case, he was seeing it all wrong. He was doing remarkable, vital work, I thought, saving lives every week. I was proud of him and full of respect for the way he was dedicating himself wholeheartedly to his preparation. Still, I should have figured out how he might have been feeling. I knew all too well the despair of being pulled from a fight for which you have spent your years preparing. Chapter 32. Thank you so much for coming, guys. I hope you all are enjoying Despair by Prince Harry as I read for you in the natural state. Thank you so much for coming, guys. If you have not yet hit that like button, go ahead and hit that like button. Share out this live so that others can join in listening to me read this book. Tell me in the comments, guys, what do you think about me reading this book? Tell me in the comments how you feel about it. Tell me in the comments. Talk to me. Let's talk. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. I enjoy reading to you, and I hope you enjoy listening. Chapter 32. From Shawberry, I moved on to Middle Wallop. I now knew how to fly an helicopter. The army conceded, but next I needed to learn how to fly one tactically while doing other things, many other things, like reading a map and locating a target and firing missiles and talking on the radios and peeing into a bag, multitasking in the air at 140 knots, not for everyone. To accomplish this Jedi mind trick, my brain would first need to be reshaped, my synapses rewired, and my Yoda in this massive neural re-engineering would be Nigel, aka Nige. It was he who drew the unenviable task of becoming my fourth and arguably most important flight instructor. The aircraft on which we had been conducting our sessions was the Squirrel. That was the colloquial name for the little French-made single-engine helicopter on which most British students trained. But Nige was less focused on the actual squirrel in which we sat than the squirrels inside my head. Head squirrels were the ancient enemies of human concentration, Nige assured me. Without my being aware of it, they had taken up residence in my consciousness. More devious than the hover monkeys, he said, they were also far from dangerous. The only way to get rid of head squirrels, Nige insisted, was iron discipline. A helicopter is easily mastered, but the head takes more time and more patience. Time and patience, I thought impatiently. I don't have much of either. I don't have much of either, Nige, so let's crack on. It also takes a kind of self-love, Nige said, and this manifests as confidence. Confidence, Lieutenant Wales, confidence. Believe in yourself. That's everything. I saw the truth in his words, but I couldn't imagine ever putting that truth into practice. The fact was, I didn't believe in myself, didn't believe in much of anything, least of all, me. Whenever I made a mistake, which was often, I was quite harsh with Harry. It felt as if my mind was seizing up, like an overheated engine. The red mist would come down, and I'd stop thinking, stop functioning. No, Nige, Nige would say softly whenever this happened. Don't let one mistake destroy this flight, Lieutenant Wales. But I let one mistake ruin many a flight. Sometimes my self-loathing would spill into Nige. After having a go at me, I'd have a go at him. Fuck it. You fly the damn thing. He'd shake his head. Lieutenant Wales, I'm not taking the controls. We are going to get down on the ground and you are going to get us there, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. He had an Herculean will. He had an Herculean will, like Herculean will. You'd never have guessed it from his appearance. Average height, average build, steel gray hair, combed neatly to one side. He wore spotless green overalls, spotless clear spectacles. He was a Navy civvy, a kindly grandpa who loved sailing, a top bloke. But he had the heart of a fucking ninja. And at that moment, I needed a ninja. Oh my, I love this book. Guys, I love this book. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying it, guys. Can you believe it? It's 3:30 in the morning and I am up and reading. You know that's me. When I get engrossed in a book, no sleep for me. I'll be reading, reading, reading. And it feels even better to read it out aloud. Usually I'll be reading in my mind, but this feels absolutely exhilarating. And I thank you guys for sticking with me. Encouragement strengthens labor. You know, that's what they say. So thanks to everybody who have been coming in and listening to me read this book. Chapter 33. Over several months, the ninja man, over several months, Nige the ninja managed to show me how to fly a helicopter while doing other things, countless other things, and what was more, to do so many other things with something approaching self-love. These were flying lessons, but I think back on them as life lessons, and gradually there were more good ones than bad ones. Good or bad, however, every 90-minute session in Nigel's Corel dojo left me hooked. Upon landing, I think I need a nap, but first, the debrief. This was where Nige the Ninja really put me through it because he sugarcoated nothing. He spoke bluntly and wounded blithely. There were things I needed to hear, and he didn't care about his tone when he told me. I got defensive. He pressed on. I shot him hate you forever stares. He pressed on. I said, yeah, I get it. He pressed on. I stopped listening. Poor Nige, he pressed on. He was, I realize now, one of the most truthful people I'd ever known, and he knew a secret about truth that many people are unwilling to accept. It's unusual or it's usually painful. He wanted me to believe in myself, but that belief could never be based on false promises or fake compliments. The royal road to mastery was paved with facts. Not that he was categorically opposed to compliments. One day, almost in passing, he said that I appeared to lack any fare. You are not terribly concerned, if I may say, Lieutenant Wells, with dying. That's true. I explained that I hadn't been afraid of death since the age of 12. He nodded once. He got it. We moved on. Chapter 34. Nige eventually released me, set me free like a wounded bird, restored to health, and with his certification, the Army pronounced me ready to fly Apaches. But nope, it was a trick. I wasn't going to fly Apaches. I was going to sit in a windowless classroom and read about Apaches. I thought, could anything be more cruel? Promise me a helicopter, hand me a stack of homework. The course lasted 3 months, during which I nearly went insane. Every night, I'd slump back in my cell-like room in the office's mess and vent to a mate on the phone, or else to my bodyguards. I considered leaving the course altogether. I'd never even wanted to fly Apaches, I said to everyone petulantly. I wanted to fly the Lynx. It was simpler to learn, and I'd have gotten back to war faster. But my commanding officer, Colonel David Meyer, squashed that idea. Not a chance, Harry. Why, Colonel? Because you have had operational ground experience in reconnaissance. You were a very fine FAC, and you are a bloody good pilot. You are going to fly Apaches. But I can tell from the way you fly, the way you you read the ground. This is what you were meant to do. Meant to do? The course was torture. And yet, I was on time every day. I showed up with my 3-ring binders full of information about the Apache engines and listened to the lectures and fought like crazy to keep up. I tried to draw on everything I had learned from my flight instructors, from Booley to Nige, and treated the classroom as an aircraft going down. My job was to regain control. And then one day, it was over. They said I'd be permitted as long last to strap myself into an honest-to-God Apache for ground taxiing. Are you joking? 4 lessons, they said. 4 lessons on taxiing? As it turned out, 4 lessons was barely enough to absorb all there was to know about ground taxiing that massive bird. I felt while taxiing as if the aircraft was on stilts, set on a bed of jelly. There were moments when I truly wondered if I'd ever be able to do it, if this whole journey might be at an end here before it had begun. I blamed part of my struggle on the seating arrangement. In the Firefly, in the Squirrel, the instructor was always right next to me. We could reach over, fix he could reach over, fix my mistakes straight away, or else model the correct way. Booley would put his hand on the controls, or Nige would do the pedals, and I'd do the same. I realized that much of what I'd learned in life had come through this sort of modeling. More than most people, I needed a guide, a guru, a partner. But in the Apache, the instructor was either way up front or way in the back, unseen. I was all alone. That's the end of chapter 34, my friends. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am enjoying reading it to you. Let's move on to chapter 35. Oops. Oops, I did something here, guys. Not sure what I did. Not sure what I did. Oh, I tried to use my screenwriting pen, but for some reason, it started to act foul. So let's continue. Chapter 35. The seating arrangement eventually became less of an issue. Day by day, the Apache felt less alien, and some days it even felt good. I learned to be alone in there, to think alone, function alone. I learned to communicate with this big, fast, nasty, beautiful beast, to speak its language, to listen when it talked. I learned to perform one set of skills with one hand, one set of skills with the other, while doing another with my feet. I learned to appreciate how phenomenal this machine was, unthinkably heavy, yet capable of ballet-like suppleness. The most technologically complex helicopter in the world, and also the most nimble. I could see why only a handful of people on Earth knew how to fly Apaches, and why it cost millions of dollars to train each of those persons. And then it was time to do it all at night. We started with an exercise called the bag, which was just what it sounded like. The Apache's windows were covered, and you felt as if you were inside a brown paper bag. You had to take all data about conditions outside the aircraft through instruments and gauges. Eerie, unnerving, but effective. You were forced to develop a kind of second sight. Then we took the chopper up into the actual night sky, make our own way out around the base, slowly expanded beyond. I was a bit trembly the first time we sailed across Salisbury Plain, over those desolate valleys and woods where I crawled and dragged my arse through those first exercises. Then I was flying over more populated areas. Then London, the Thames glistening in the darkness, the Millennium Wheel winking at the stars, the Houses of Parliament, and Big Ben, and the palaces. I wondered if Granny was in, and if she was awake. Were the gorges settling down while I did those graceful whirls over their fuzzy heads? Was the flag up? In darkness, I became fully proficient with the monocle, the most astonishing and iconic part of the Apache's technology. A sensor in the Apache's nose transmitted images through a cable up to the cockpit, where it fed into the monocle, which was clipped to my helmet in front of my right eyeball. Through that monocle, I got all my knowledge of the outside world. All my senses were reduced to that one small portal. It felt at first like writing with my toe or breathing through my ear. And then it became second nature. And then it became mystical. Circling London one night, I was suddenly blinded and thought for half a second that I might drop into the Thames. I saw bright colors, mostly emerald green, and after a few seconds, I realized someone on the ground had hit us with a laser pen. I was disoriented and furious, but I told myself to be grateful for the experience, for the practice. I was also perversely grateful for the stray memory it knocked loose. Mohammed Al Fayed giving Willie and me laser pens from Harrods, which he owned. He was the father of Mommy's boyfriend, so maybe he was trying to win us over. If so, job done. We thought those lasers were genius. We whipped them around like lightsabers. Chapter 36. Near the tail end of my Apache training at Wattisham Airfield in Suffolk, I got one more instructor. It was his job to put on the finishing touches. Upon meeting, shaking hands, he gave me a knowing smile. I smiled back. He kept smiling. I smiled back, but started to wonder why. I thought he was about to pay me a compliment or ask a favor. Instead, he asked if I recognized his voice. No. He was part of the team that extracted me, he said. Oh, back in 2008? Yes. We had talked briefly over the radio that night, I recalled. I remember you gutted. I remember how gutted you were. Yeah. I could hear it in his voice. Yeah, I was devastated, actually. He smiled wider. Now look at you. Chapter 37. I was turning 25 in the next few days, and it felt more like just, oh my God. You are funny. You are funny. You are funny. That's a text I just got from somebody who is actually listening to the live right now. You are funny, but thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, guys. Chapter 37. I was turning 25 in a few days, and it felt like more than just another birthday. Mates told me 25 was the watershed age, the moment when many young men and women come to a fork in their personal road. At 25, you take a concrete step forward, or else begin to slide backwards. I was ready to move forward. I felt in many ways that I'd been bag flying for years. I reminded myself that it ran in the family, that 25 had been a big year for many of us. Granny, to name one, at 25, she had become the 61st monarch in the history of England. So I decided to mark this milestone birthday with a trip. Botswana, again. The whole gang was there, and in between cake and cocktails, they said how different I seemed again. I had seemed older, harder after my first combat tour, but now they said I seemed more grounded. Odd, I thought, through flight training, I've become more grounded. No one gave me more praise or look more no one gave me more praise or love than Tej and Mike. Late one night, however, Mike sat me down for a somber heart to heart. At their kitchen table, he spoke at length about my relationship with Africa. The time's come, he said, for that relationship to change. Until then, the friendship had been all take, 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 a fairly typical dynamic for Brits in Africa. But now I needed to give back. For years, I've heard him and Tej and others lamenting the crisis facing this place: climate change, poaching, drought, fires. I was the only person they knew who had any kind of influence, any kind of global megaphone, the only person who might actually be able to do something. What can I do, Mike? Shine a light. Chapter 38. Group of us piled into flat bottom boats. A group of us oh my gosh, God, I kind of read ahead there a little bit. But chapter 38. A group of us piled into flat bottomed boats and steered upriver. We camped for a few days, explored some remote islands, no one for miles and miles around. One afternoon, we stopped off on Kingfisher Island and mixed up some drinks and watched the sunset. Rain was falling, which made the light look pink. We listened to music, everything mellow, dreamy, and lost all track of time. As we were pushing off, getting back into the river, we suddenly ran into two big problems: darkness and a major storm. Each was a problem you never wanted to encounter on the Akavangwa. But both at the same time, we were in deep trouble. Now came the wind. In the dark, in the maelstrom, the river was impossible to navigate. The water pitched and rolled. Plus, the driver on our boat was wasted. We kept plowing into sandbars. I thought we might end up in this river tonight. I shouted that I was taking the wheel. I recalled brilliant flashes of lightning, seismic claps of thunder. There were 12 of us on two boats, and no one was saying a word. Even the most experienced Africa hands were tight-faced, though we tried to pretend we were in control by continuing to blast the music. Suddenly the river narrowed, then bent sharply. We were desperate to get back, but we had to be patient, obey the river, go where it lead us. Just then, a massive flash, everything bright as noon for about 2 seconds, long enough to see, standing directly before us in the middle of the river, an enormous group of elephants. In the flare-up, I locked eyes with one. I saw her snow-white tusk swooping up. I saw every wrinkle in her dark, wet skin, the hard waterline above her shoulders. I saw her giant ears, shaped like an angel's wings. Someone whispered, "Holy shit!" Someone cut the music. Both drivers killed the engines. In total silence, we floated on the swollen river, waiting for the next lightning flash. When it came, there they were again, those majestic creatures. This time, when I stared at the elephant closest to me, when I looked deep into her eyeballs, when she looked back into mine, I thought of the all-seeing eye of the Apache, and I thought of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, and I thought of a camera's lens, convex and glassy like the elephant's eye, except that a camera lens always make me nervous, and this eye made me feel safe. This eye wasn't judging, wasn't taking, it just was. If anything, the eye was slightly tearful. Was that possible? Elephants have been known to weep. They hold funerals for loved ones, and when they come upon an elephant lying dead in the bush, they stopped and paid their respects. Were our boats intruding on some sort of ceremony, some sort of gathering? Or maybe we had interrupted some kind of rehearsal. From From antiquity comes the story of one elephant who was observed patiently practicing complicated dance steps he'd need to perform at an upcoming parade. Really? Really? Elephants are really majestic. But he said they were practicing a complicated dance move for an upcoming parade. The storm was getting worse. We had to go. We restarted the boats, cruised away. Goodbye, we whispered to the elephants. I eased into the middle of the current, lit a cigarette, told my memory to hold on to this encounter, this unreal moment when the line between me and the external world grew blurry or disappeared outright. Everything for 1/2 second was one. Everything made sense. Try to remember, I thought, how it felt to be that close to the truth, the real truth. That life isn't all good, but it isn't all bad either. Try to remember how it felt, finally, to understand what Mike had been trying to say. Shine a light. Chapter 39. I got my wings, Pa, as Army Air Corps Colonel in Chief pinned them to. Oh my gosh, that was so funny. But chapter 39. I got my wings, Pa, as Army. Guys, you see why reading is important? Full stops are important and commas are important. Stay with me. I got my wings. Pa, as Army Air Corps Colonel in Chief, pinned them to my chest. May 2010. Happy day. Pa, wearing his blue beret, officially presented me with mine. I put it on and we saluted each other. It felt almost more intimate than a hug. Camilla was on hand, and Mommy's sister, and Chelsea. We were back together again, then broke up soon after. We had no choice yet again. We had all the same old problems. Nothing had been solved. Also, Chelsea wanted to travel, have fun, be young, but I was once again on a path to war. I'd soon be shipping off. If we stayed together, we'd be lucky to see each other a handful of times over the next 2 years. And that was no kind of relationship. Neither of us was surprised when we found ourselves in the same old emotional cul-de-sac. Goodbye, Chelsea. Goodbye, Haza. The day I got my wings, I figured she got hers. We went to Botswana one last time, one last trip upriver, we said, one last visit to Tej and Mike. We had great fun and naturally wavered about our decision. I tried now and then and talked I tried now and then and talked now and then of different ways that this might still work. Charles played along. We were being so oblivious, willfully delusional, that Tej felt the need to step in. It's over, kids. You are postponing the inevitable and making yourselves crazy in the process. We were staying in a tent in her garden. She sat with us in the tent, delivering these difficult truths while holding hands with each of us, looking us in the eyes. She urged us to let this breakup be final. Don't waste the most precious thing there is, time. She was right, I knew. As Sergeant Major Booley said, it's time. So I forced myself to put the relationship out of my mind. In fact, all relationships. Stay busy, I told myself as I flew away from Botswana. In the short in the short while left before you in the short while left before you ship to Afghanistan, just stay busy. At that end, I went to Lesotho with Willie. We visited several schools built by Centerbell. Prince Prince Cieso was with us. He had co-founded the charity with me back in 2006, shortly after losing his own mother. His mother had also been a fighter on the war against HIV. He took us to meet scores of children, each with a wrenching story. The average life expectancy in Lesotho at that time was 40 something, while in Britain it was 79 for men, 82 for women. Being a child in Lesotho was like being middle-aged in Manchester. And while there were several complicated reasons for this, the main one was HIV. A quarter of all Lesotho adults were HIV positive. After 2 or 3 days, we set off with Prince Seeiso towards some remote schools off the grid, way off. As a gift, Prince Seeiso gave us wild ponies to ride part of the way and tribal blankets for the cold. We wore them as capes. Our first stop was a frozen village in the clouds, Semonkong, some 7,000 feet above sea level. It lay between snow-tipped mountains. Plumes of warm air spurted from the horses' nose as we pushed them up, up, up. But when the climb got too steep, we switched to trucks. Upon arriving, we went straight into the school. Shepherd boys would come here twice a week, have a hot meal, and go to class. We sat in semi-darkness beside a paraffin lamp, watching a lesson, and then we sat on the ground with a dozen boys, some as young as 8. We listened to them describe their daily trek to our school. It defied belief. After 12 hours of tending their cattle and sheep, they'd walk for 2 hours through mountain passes just to learn math, reading, and writing. Such was their hunger to learn. They braved sore feet, bitter cold, and far worse. They were so vulnerable on the road, so exposed to the elements. Several had died from lightning strikes. Many had been attacked by stray dogs. They dropped their voices and told us that many had also been sexually abused by wanderers, rustlers, nomads, and other boys. I felt ashamed to think of all my bitching about school, about anything. Despite what they had suffered, the boys were still boys. Their joy was irrepressible. Their, they thrilled us. They were thrilled at the gifts. They thrilled at the gifts we had brought. Warm coats, wool beanies. They put on the clothes, danced, sang. We joined them. One boy kept to the side. His face was sound. His face was round, open, transparent. There was obviously a terrible burden on his heart. I felt it would be prying to ask, but I had one more gift in my bag, a torch, and I gave it to him. I said I hoped it would light his way each day to school. He smiled. I wanted to tell him that his smile would light mine. I tried. Alas, my Sesotho wasn't very good. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go light your world. Chapter 40. Let's go on to chapter 40, and I think this is going to be the last one for today. There is a candle in every soul, some lightly burning, some dark and cold. All right, guys, I just traced off there. Thank you so much for coming, guys. I sincerely enjoy this. Just a little bit of me as I read for you. All right, I like to break off in songs. If you all don't know that by now, those of you who have been with me for the last year, you all know that. I usually break off in songs for whatever reason. That's how my brain functions. All right, let's continue with chapter 40. Soon after we returned to Britain, the palace announced that Willie was going to marry. November 2010. News to me. All that time together in Lesotho, he had never mentioned it. The papers published florid stories about the moment. I realized Willie and Kate were well matched. The moment I appreciated the depths of their love and thus decided to gift Willie the ring I had inherited from Mummy, the legendary sapphire. A tender moment between brothers, a bonding moment for all three of us, and absolute rubbish. None of it ever happened. I never gave Willie that ring because it wasn't mine to give. He already had it. He had asked for it after Mommy died, and been more than happy to let it go. Okay. Now, as Willie focused on wedding preparations, I wished him well and turned sharply inward. I thought long and hard about my singlehood. I'd always assumed I'd be the first to be married because I'd wanted it so badly. I'd always assumed that I'd be a young husband, a young father, because I'd resolved not to become my father. He had been an older dad, and I'd always felt that this created problems, placed barriers between us. In his middle years, he had become more sedentary, more habitual. He liked his routines. He wasn't the kind of father who played endless rounds of tag or tossed the ball until long after dark. He had been so he had been so once. He had chased us all over Sandringham, making up wonderful games, but the one where he wrapped us in blankets like hot dogs until we screamed like helpless laugh with helpless laughter, and then yanked the blanket and shut us out of one end. I don't know if Willie or I have ever laughed harder, but long before we were ready, he stopped engaging in that kind of physical fun. He just didn't have the enthusiasm, the puff. But I would. I always promised myself I would. Now I wondered, will I? Was that the real me who made that promise to become a young father? Or was this the real me struggling to find the right person, the right partner, while also struggling to work out who I was? Why is this thing, which I supposedly want so badly, not happening? And what if it never happens? What will my life mean? What will my ultimate purpose be? War, I reckoned. What when all else failed, as I usually did, I still was soldiering on. If only I had the deployment date. And after the wars, I thought, there will always be charitable work. Since the Lesotho trip, I had felt more passionate than ever about continuing mommy's causes. You know, guys, as I am reading, all I am thinking about is how Harry is so much like his mom, thinking about charity, thinking about the people who are in need, thinking about not sticking to the status quo of royal responsibilities, but rather thinking about the common man and humanity in general, rather than the box in which he was born, raised, and expected to continue the rest of his life. And I'd said it before, as I admire Prince Harry and the choices he has made, I I just so much more, I'm so much more convinced that this boy is the reincarnation of his mom. His mom has practically birthed herself in a boy. I believe so. And that is one reason why I admire him so much, being so down to earth, being so humanly, because I see royals as not expressing their human self. They are sort of detached from humanity, from human's experience, except for where they can exploit it. My view and my view only. If you share the same view, up to you, but that is my view. So let us continue. I'm going to read the paragraph again. Why is this thing, which I supposedly want so badly, not happening? And what if it never happens? What will my life mean? What will my ultimate purpose be? War, I reckoned, when all else failed, as it usually did, I still had soldiering. If only I had a deployment date. And after the wars, I thought, there will always be charitable work. Since the Lesotho trip, I had felt more passionate than ever about continuing mommy's causes. And I was determined to take up the cause Mike gave me at his kitchen table. That's enough for a full life, I told myself. It seemed like serendipity, therefore, like a synthesis, like a synthesis of all my thinkings, when I heard from a group of wounded soldiers planning a trek to the North Pole. They were hoping to raise millions for walking with the wounded, and also to become the first amputees ever to reach the pole unsupported. They invited me to join them. I wanted to say yes. I was dying to say yes. But there was just one problem. The trek was in early April, dangerously close to Willie's announced wedding date. I'd have to get there and back with no hitches, or risk missing the ceremony. But the North Pole wasn't a place you could ever be sure of getting to and from without hitches. The North Pole was a place of infinite hitches. There were always variables, usually related to weather. So I was nervous at the project, and the palace was obviously nervous too. I asked JP for his advice. He smiled. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Yes, it is. You have got to go. But first, he said, there was one other place I needed to go. In a direct continuation of conversation he and I had begun 5 years earlier. After my Nazi debacle, he had organized a trip to Berlin. And so, December 2010, a bitterly cold day, I put my fingertips to the bullet holes in the city's walls, the still fresh scars from Hitler's insane vow to fight to the last man. I stood at the former site of the Berlin Wall, which had also been the site of the SS torture chambers, and swore I would hear the echoes of agonizing screams on the wind. I met a woman who had been sent to Auschwitz. She described her confinement, the horrors she saw, heard, smelt. Her stories were as difficult to hear as they were vital. But I won't retell them. They are not mine to retell. I'd long understood that the photo of me in a Nazi uniform had been the result of various failures, failures of thinking, failure of character, but it had also been a failure of education. Not just school education, but self-education. I hadn't known enough about the Nazis, hadn't taught myself enough, hadn't asked enough questions of teachers and families and survivors. I had resolved to change that. I couldn't become the person I hoped to be until I changed that. Wow. Thank you all so much, guys, for listening. That's where we are going to stop for today. Thanks again for coming. Thanks again for listening. If you are enjoying me read this book, please talk to me in the comments below because I absolutely enjoy reading it to you, with you, and for us. Until next time, my friends, this is Trev from Trevessence, where your journey matters. Join us next time when we read the book Spare by Prince Harry. When we come again, we'll be on to chapter 41 of part 2. Until next time, have a great day, my friends.